The ambulance arrived and I remember watching the ambulance crew put me on the gurney, as though I was standing outside my body. I wasn't frightened but more, just amazed. At the same time, I was so engrossed in the feeling of peace that I was not really totally absorbed in what I was observing. It was kind of a dual thing going on where I was watching it thinking it was very interesting, and then I realized I wasn't going to die, because I sort of intuitively, I guess, knew that help had arrived on time, and they would save my life. The most extraordinary thing I can share with you is the feeling I had. It was just a feeling of tremendous serenity and peace. I have never forgotten it and I have often wondered if this was just like the beginning of a NDE. It was dark, no lights, but it was so comforting and warm. I remember being back in my body at some point in the ambulance, and somewhat semi-aware of the work they were doing to save my life. Many hours later, as I was leaving the hospital, I recognized the ambulance people who had worked on me. They were there, perhaps having brought in another patient. I thanked them for helping me. I remember they had a very astonished look on their face, and I didn't realize, until later, that I could not have physically recognized them, because I was not conscious. I reasoned that perhaps I recognized their voices as I do remember hearing them speak in the ambulance, but it was a sense more specific than that, as though I recognized their faces. Next NDE. I had the flu and lay down on the sofa. The next thing I knew I was surrounded by total blackness and felt euphoric and very loved. I heard someone calling my name in the distance. It was the rescue squad calling out to me telling me that they had shocked me 3 times and unless I showed some response, they would have to stop. I looked around and just saw blackness, but I felt I was on a cliffside and knew I had to jump across to remain alive. I believed it would be safe to try to jump across, because if I failed I would go back to God. The main reason I wanted to return to life was because of my love for my wife and son. I was totally selfish in that I felt I could not be happy in heaven without them. I jumped and reached out fully to grasp onto anything I could. The next thing I knew I awoke in intensive care, about a week later, in the presence of my wife. I asked my wife what happened and she said the rescue squad had shocked me 3 times, without a response from me. At that point they called out to me asking for a sign of life from me. She said they saw my hands move. Based on the movement they shocked me a 4th time. The rescue unit said this was unusual and normally they quit after the 3rd try. About 2 years later, I received a phone call from the rescue squad inquiring about my outcome. The person I spoke with said they had not expected to speak to me, because they never had a person recover, who had been as sick as I was that morning. I was at Walmart walking around with my mom a couple of days before Christmas. I began to feel some strange sensations. My lips got puffy, my feet started to tingle, my hands started swelling and I recognized it as an allergic reaction, because I had asthma as a child and some allergy problems. I told my mom to go to the pharmacy area and get me some allergy medication. I believe I asked for Benadryl thinking that would relieve my symptoms and told her I was going to the car to try to relax. When I got to the car, I sat down and began to feel more and more uncomfortable. Certainly, my mom didn't realize the severity of the situation and the store was very crowded because of last-minute Christmas shopping. I don't know how long it was until she got to the car, but I would guess 15 to 20 minutes. During this time, I became increasingly uncomfortable, and wasn't sure what was happening to me other than I realized it was allergic. As time passed I began to have an overwhelming feeling that I was about to die. I became very frightened and began trying to relax, because I was losing the ability to breathe. I began to struggle with my clothes, pulling at them because of the burning and itching sensation in my skin. Finally, my mom came and when she opened the door, I had very little room left in my airway to breathe. In a strained effort, I uttered the word ambulance. I then keeled over in the seat of the car. I remember that I was aware that people were gathering around the car. The passenger's side of the front seat was where my head was positioned. The door opened and a woman began trying to give me mouth to mouth. A man pulled her away. At that point, I was still struggling to breath, and frightened, but no longer physically fighting. Suddenly, something happened to me. I felt as though I was floating. I did not see a light, or any entities or people who have died. I just felt this flood of warmth wrap around me. The only thing I can metaphorically describe it to, is what it must feel like to be in the womb before you are born. It was like floating in a liquid bubble. I had a sensation of serenity that I cannot describe. I would describe it for you if I could find the right adjective, but there just isn't one, at least not that I'm familiar with. It was like perfect peace. I felt no pain, and no more struggle. Next, NDE. In the basement of our house, I was helping my husband with locksmithing job. I moved his gun, in its holster, to work on the locks. As I was beginning to set the weapon on the floor, it slipped out of the holster and rotated. It was pointing toward me and fell hammer first onto a metal stand. The Ruger Blackhawk .357 revolver had a defective safety and fired. I saw, heard, felt, and smelled the gun a bullet in that order. I grabbed my abdomen. The bullet had entered left and about 3 inches from my navel. The only pain at that time was a burning sensation at the entrance site. I screamed for my husband, who was outside, and walked to the open door. When he saw my wound, he was a retired firefighter, emergency medical technician. He grabbed me and laid me on the floor. We lived in the country, so I was taken by ambulance to a school where the helicopter met us and flew me to the medical center. During the flight, I was conscious the entire time. As we landed at the hospital, the paramedic radioed that my BP was 50-0. The surgical team met us at the landing pad, and I was taken right into surgery. They put a mask over my face and I convulsed, as they gave me a paralyzing drug. As they intubated me, I heard a nurse say, "Okay, she's ready." I felt a searing cutting from the top of my sternum down my torso. I could only scream in my mind that I was still conscious and wasn't asleep. I felt the surgeon lift up the right side of my intestines, and then the left side looking for damage. On a pain scale of 1 to 10, that was a 15. I was pleading for God to take me, it was so excruciating. When the doctor stopped, I said never mind. He then worked higher in my torso. I felt sewing around my right lung. I then became aware of a light off to my left. I no longer felt my body, but I believe I was still in it. I realized that my grandmother and great-grandmother were standing at the entrance to the light. My grandmother had died in 1978, and I had never met my great-grandmother. Both were native. They told me by telepathy that it was not my time and that I had more to do. During this time, I have no idea how long this lasted. I was completely immersed in the most incredible love, contentment, acceptance, feeling of being home, that you only could imagine. In fact, we don't have words to describe the feelings. The next memory I have is my internist asking me to squeeze his hand. When I had my NDE, the surgeon was giving me heart massage to keep me alive. No one expected me to live. The recovery was awful, but I did it. The surgeon was horrified that I was awake for the surgery. They compared my memories with the recording and I was right.